I thought it'd be funny to do like one of those shocked face thumbnails. Everyone always looks so surprised on YouTube in their thumbnails. They're like, "Oh my gosh!" That's not really my style, but I figured let's give one a shot. It seems to be a popular thing to do. I thought for this week on the second channel, Foolish Bailey, subscribe if you're not already. I thought I would break down this year's Hall of Fame ballot. Now, voting's been going on for a few weeks now, so we can talk about the results. But I think the way I'm going to structure this is first I'm going to talk about the candidates that are on the ballot. Then I'm going to release my mock ballot, and this is very important to say it's a mock ballot. I'm not a Hall of Fame voter, not a member of the BBWAA. I'll probably never vote for the Hall of Fame, but I can explain who I would vote for and why. I in recent years I was a little bit more involved with the Hall of Fame process just because of all the rallying I was doing for Larry Walker. Thankfully, he got in. Did I help? Was that a help to him? I don't really know. I don't think individually I did anything, but I think I contributed to just sort of this zeitgeist and this spirit around Larry Walker, where people were willing to go back and look at his candidacy, and what happened was a lot of voters realized that he was in fact a Hall of Famer all along. I don't think there's quite a Larry Walker on this ballot. But if there is anyone that's close, it's probably like Scott Rowland or Andrew Jones. That's probably the type of player I'm thinking of. But even then, I think Larry Walker, as a candidate, have been more disrespected relative to like his just overall talent level and what he achieved in his career. So I think what I'd like to do first is I'd like to meet the newbies, and the newbies are the players who this is their first time on the Hall of Fame ballot. And actually being on the Hall of Fame ballot, in my opinion, is an honor within itself. There's a lot of players, who are retired with careers of 10 years or more, and yet not all of them get on the Hall of Fame ballot in the first place. So the three players I'm going to focus on are Torrey Hunter, Tim Hudson's right there, and then Mark Burley. So I'm going to start with Torrey Hunter. Torrey Hunter hit 353 home runs, which is the ninth most by a center fielder all time. He also had 2,452 hits. So from a counting stats perspective, he's looking pretty good. I'll say that way. He's looking pretty good. He does have a thing that he was remembered for as well, which is robbing home runs. And he famously robbed Barry Bonds in that All-Star game in Miller Park. And he was generally a well-liked guy. I'm anticipating Torrey Hunter will probably stay on the ballot, and this is overall a pretty weak class of new candidates. I would say there's no one new on the ballot that I would say is a slam dunk Hall of Famer, which is actually a little against the norm. At least in terms of the statistics. In 2022 we'll get A-Rod and Big Papi. In 2023 we'll get Beltran. In 2024 we'll get Beltre, Utley, and Mauer. In terms of their statistics, all those players are like a cut above the new players on the ballot this year. So we talked about Hunter. Let's talk about Tim Hudson as well. I think Tim Hudson is a pitcher who almost epitomizes Hall of Very Good, but to his credit, in the last 30 years, he had, if you're looking at pitchers in the last 30 years who had at least 3,000 innings pitched and a 1.20 ERA plus or better, it's Tim Hudson, Randy Johnson, Roger Clemens, Curt Schilling, Greg Maddux, Mike Mussina, Tom Glavine, Kevin Brown. So, there could be some arguments made for Tim Hudson. I think I just made it. And Tim Hudson, again, is a guy the question isn't going to be, is Tim Hudson going to get in the Hall of Fame this year? It's going to be, can Tim Hudson stay on the Hall of Fame ballot? And that brings us to Mark Burley, who of all the newbies is the one I'm most interested in. I made a baseball bits about him. Obviously, he has the most baseball reference WAR of the new candidates with 59.1. Now, WAR isn't everything, but I think 60 to 65 WAR, that's around where the discussion kind of changes. If you're talking about a player with more than, say, 60 or 65 WAR, you're probably going to be looking for reasons not to put him in the Hall of Fame at that point. Whereas if you're talking with players less than 60 WAR, then you're having to talk about reasons why they should be in the Hall of Fame. For reference, Larry Walker was, I think, at 72.7. So that seemed like a no-brainer, at least from a WAR perspective on Larry Walker. I can't say that quite yet about any of the new guys. The thing about Burley is a very consistent accumulator, which, is kind of a negative in my mind. Like, I prefer a player who was truly dominant at one point, and if they were truly dominant for a prolonged stretch, even better. Burley was just always really good. So I would generally say I would prefer, a hard peak over consistency. I think Burley represents consistency. I think Tim Hudson and Torrey Hunter also represent some serious consistency more than really, really high peaks. And then, I look at Swisher, Victorino, Zito, Troy Hawkins, Dan Heron, Michael Kadire, AJ Burnett, Aramis Ramirez. There's some great players on here. I mean, Zito, fantastic Cy Young winner. Aramis Ramirez, really underrated player. Heron was good. Like, these were all good players. But I just I don't see any of them as competitive on this ballot, and I expect they'll fall off. But it's an honor to be included on the ballot, in my opinion, and I don't think we should, make light of that. So not much new class fanfare, I think. So there's not going to be a lot of discussion about the new class. I think what you're going to see is a continuation of dealing with the PED users from the steroid era. That's kind of like the giant rain cloud that's been following around this ballot for years now. Is we just don't have an answer as to what to do with the PED users. Everyone kind of has their own ideas. Some people want to put them all in. Some people don't want to put any in. Me, I think I have a pretty nuanced perspective, and I'm excited to share that with you all. I would say what tends to happen is that most players get in either their first year on the ballot. Okay, like you get in their first year on the ballot, like say, for example, Derek Jeter did. You get in your second year on the ballot, like say, for example, didn't Guerrero do that when Guerrero's second year guy? So like you get in the second year if for whatever dumb reason they think you're not a first ballot Hall of Famer, and then you become a second ballot Hall of Famer. And if you don't get in those first 2 years, then you very often have to wait until your 10th year on the ballot, and that's I think we're getting, even more to that sort of relationship with time on the ballot versus results, which it doesn't mean that years 3 through 9 don't matter, but they seem inconsequential because really year 10 is when they have to decide. So this is very important to remember. Barry Bonds, Curt Schilling, and Roger Clemens, they're in year 9. So it's not referendum time yet. This is the prelude to referendum time. And that is when the voters who have said no to these guys for the last 9 years will have to actually decide, if you catch my drift. Beyond Bonds and Clemens, as far as the PED guys go, there's Gary Sheffield, right there, Gary Sheffield. He was in the Mitchell Report for his ties to Balco. There's Manny Ramirez, who, unlike everyone else I've talked about, actually served a PED suspension. And then there's Sammy Sosa, who has long been a suspected steroid user, but in my opinion, and this is important, and I'll talk about it later, there's not that strong evidence against Sammy Sosa. Like I'm willing to give Sammy Sosa some benefit of the doubt that I think he's very different from someone like Ramirez, and I'm really excited to sort of explore the nuances of that. And finally, there's Andy Pettitte, who statistically has a solid case, but he admitted to using HGH, and he only captured 11% of the vote last year. And Schilling's not a PED guy, but I feel like almost lumping him in here because of the character concerns, which I'm about to talk about. One good thing about Pettitte is that there aren't really character concerns outside of cheating at baseball, basically. So, for example, Game of Shadows paints Barry Bonds as a domestic abuser, and Roger Clemens had, and this is very important, allegedly, a relationship with country singer Mindy McCready that began when she was just 15 and he was 28. Rumored, allegedly. So there's extra baggage there, for sure. And then you get to Schilling, and Schilling's baggage is not tied to PED usage, but he is in fact another player on the ballot that is going up against his own sort of character concerns. I want to be very clear here on Curt Schilling. Curt Schilling is statistically a Hall of Famer. No, he didn't win 300 games, but he's worth about 80 WAR. He's arguably the best playoff pitcher in modern baseball history. Like whatever like old school voters and like the Veterans Committee thought Jack Morris is, that's what actually like Curt Schilling is. Like he unbelievable playoff pitcher. And what's cool about Schilling as a player is that he really dominated the strike zone. Among pitchers who are retired in modern baseball history, he's the all-time leader in strikeout to walk ratio. There's guys that are active that are going to beat him, but quite frankly, they're from a different era in regards to strikeouts. So Schilling, a really strong resume. If he kept his mouth shut, he would be in the Hall of Fame by now. And so there's no debate to me about Curt Schilling as a player. Of course, Curt is also outspoken on political and social issues, and I think what's tricky is deciding how much of this is just sort of like generic conservative politics. And I'll say like conservative politics are actually pretty popular among baseball players. Like Curt Schilling, I don't think carries opinions that are like terribly unpopular and that aren't that far off base from what you might find in a baseball locker room, particularly one during the time that he played. So how much of that is generic conservative politics, and how much of that is, something more sinister, like just overt white nationalism, for example? And I think the biggest thing, in my opinion, that's going against Curt Schilling is his disdain for journalists in particular. A few years ago, he tweeted a photo of a t-shirt that advocated for the lynching of journalists. It was could be argued as a joke, but again, the message was basically we should hang journalists. And the thing is, journalists, that's who vote for the Hall of Fame. Like this was, and I know those probably weren't the types of journalists he was talking about. Like he was probably talking about like, people who write about politics, not people who write about baseball. But the message he sent was clear, and I think Hall of Fame voters heard it. Like Curt Schilling, not just disagrees with the media, but is willing to at least joke around with the idea of them being violently attacked and killed even. So that is where his unpopularity on the ballot stems from. A lot of it is that particular incident on Twitter. Schilling got up to 70% last year, but he's also in year 9, so we got to keep in mind it's not ultimatum time. That comes next year. So we've gotten kind of the heavy stuff out of the way. It's not fun to talk about Curt Schilling, but there are players who are actually, I think, a lot of fun to talk about on this ballot. And I'm going to start with Scott Rowland. Scott Rowland is one of the best defensive third basemen of all time, and he's also a pretty darn good hitter. And I think if there's any example, just a non-problematic, good player on this ballot, it's probably Scott Rowland. In terms of fielding runs by third baseman, he's third all time behind Brooks Robinson and Adrian Beltre. And of course, Beltre is going to waltz right into the Hall of Fame first ballot, probably 95% plus. He's not the hitter that Beltre was. Well, actually, maybe you could argue he was. Beltre had a much longer career, though. Beltre sustained it. But I will say, so for Rowland, offensively, he had a career 122 OPS plus, and which is really good. It's 20% above average. So when you're talking about this elite, all-time great third baseman, defender, and a really, really solid hitter as well. And also include the fact that third base is kind of an underrepresented position in the Hall of Fame. There have been candidates like Rowland who have kind of come and gone. Buddy Bell is kind of a similar comp to Rowland, although I think Rowland might be a bit better. I think it's a slam dunk. I think this is an underrepresented position. I think this is, if someone came up to me and said, "Hey, I have a Hall of Fame vote, but I can only vote for one player," I would probably tell them to vote for Scott Rowland, because that you don't have to do any mental gymnastics. I just think he's a Hall of Famer. Someone who's pretty close in that regard as well as Andrew Jones, because by just total zone, defensive runs saved, those typical kind of advanced defensive metrics, he's statistically the best center fielder of all time. And if you don't agree with that, he's at least top 2 alongside Willie Mays. And Andrew Jones, we know the story. Decade of dominance to start his career, but he wasn't good after he reached the age of 30. quite frankly, I think he did enough. And I think it basically just boils down to this. Like, if I told you the greatest defensive center fielder of all time also hit 434 home runs, like, you would probably think that's a first ballot Hall of Famer, right? Right? Like, that if I didn't tell you his name, if I just came up to it, I said, the best defensive center fielder of all time hit 434 home runs. Hall of Famer, yes or no? And that's what it kind of just comes down to. So Jones, again, sort of a sabermetric darling. Another sabermetric darling, Billy Wagner. It's not easy to vote for a pitcher who only threw 903 innings, but Billy Wagner's 903 innings are better than anybody else's. Among players with at least 900 innings at least. Let me check these levels just to make sure I'm good here. Okay, I'm good here. Thank you. So like among pitchers with 900 innings, his 900 innings stack up against anyone in baseball history. So for example, among players with 900 innings, he's first all time in strikeouts per nine. He had a 2.31 ERA, 1.87 ERA plus, and big disclaimer, I don't care about saves at all. I don't care about saves, but he's sixth all time there, so that's pretty solid as well. And then finally, there's Bobby Abreu. This is Bobby Abreu's second year on the ballot. He got just over 5% of the vote last year, so he was at danger of falling off. Bobby Abreu, I have a lot of memories of Bobby Abreu playing. He played for the Phillies, and I was a Braves fan growing up. I remember Bobby Abreu going nuts in the home run derby, which is probably his most famous accomplishment, at least. He was just always a really solid player, but he suffers from what I would call absolutely zero Hall of Fame vibe. Absolutely zero Hall of Fame vibe. Nobody watching Bobby Abreu at the time thought, aha, now there's a Hall of Famer. Larry Walker, to some extent, had the problem, but even he won like MVP awards and stuff like that. But it's just because he was hurt all the time. When Bobby Abreu played, again, like it's just like no one cared. Here's the thing. Bobby Abreu has like the same WAR as Vlad Guerrero Sr., that is. And Vlad Guerrero Sr., when you watched him play, everyone was like, well, this is a Hall of Famer. It was just like a foregone conclusion, and he made it in pretty easily. Not much sweat. So basically the thing with Abreu is he's an on-base machine with 400 steals at 75% success rate. So a good, efficient base stealer, 400 steals, on-base machine. The only other players with at least a 395 on-base percentage and 400 steals since baseball was integrated are Barry Bonds and Rickey Henderson. So it's those two and Bobby Abreu. Now, there's a few more players that I think they're definitely worth mentioning. One of them is Omar Vizquel. He got over 50% of the vote last year, which I believe was his third year on the ballot. So he's on a pretty good trajectory to get into the Hall of Fame. The question is now, because the ballot has been clearing up over the years, is like, has everyone who's already gonna vote for Vizquel voted for Vizquel? Because if so, it's gonna be tough for him to gain the votes needed to reach 75% someday. Vizquel, he's the opposite of like these short-term peak guys. Like he's kind of the opposite of Andrew Jones. The traditional voters, they like him a lot. He's extremely highly regarded with 11 Gold Gloves at shortstop. The defensive metrics show he was really good at shortstop, but he not exactly Andrelton Simmons, not exactly Ozzie Smith. Just kind of consistently really good at shortstop, never just mind-blowingly insane. And he was a bad hitter. He had a career 82 OPS plus, but because he played so long, he reached 2,800 hits. And every candidate, if you've watched the Bobby Wallace baseball bits, you'll know this. Every candidate with 2,800 hits has eventually made it to Cooperstown, once you account for the steroid guys like Palmeiro and Pete Rose. So, Vizquel, I will say, this is hush hush. This is gonna be a lot of rumored, allegedly. I've heard both steroid rumors for Vizquel and also domestic violence rumors for Vizquel. I don't know, as far as the voters go, where they are of that, how much they're taking that into consideration. But I've heard whispers, and in some cases more than whispers, people outright saying it. But that's allegedly rumored. I don't know Omar Vizquel. So let's move on here to Todd Helton, another pretty good one. I don't know. You could have arguably said Todd Helton's a sabermetric darling, but it's tough because it kind of cuts both ways with Coors. He's Todd Helton. It's Coors. He played half his career at Coors. Todd Helton is a career 300, 400, 500 hitter, which is what I consider to be like the platonic ideal of hitting, which is when you have a batting average above 300 non-base percentage above 400, and a slugging above 500. And unlike Larry Walker, he was a Rocky his entire career. And obviously that comes with the home road splits that you would expect. And then there's Jeff Kent, who, he's remembered. He had a pretty prickly personality. He was not a great defender at second base, but he's one of the best offensive second basemen of all time. Among second basemen, he is first all time in home runs. Among people who played the majority of their games at second base, no one hit more home runs than Jeff Kent. And in terms of OPS, he's actually fourth all time with an 855. That's trailing only Hall of Famers Rogers Hornsby, Charlie Gehringer, Jackie Robinson. So, a strong case could be made for Kent based on that alone. So finally, let's get to my ballot. We're going to start here with a couple of names that I think are a package deal. I think if you vote for one of these players, you vote for the other. And generally with how the voting has gone, it's gone that way. My opinion on these players has evolved. Basically, if Bud Selig is going into the Hall of Fame, well, he's already in there. But if Bud Selig's in the Hall of Fame and he so much of his legacy is based on how baseball grew due to him turning a blind eye to the steroid usage, then I think that Barry Bonds, and I want to make sure, let's make that a much larger size. Doesn't have to be that large. We're going to put technical difficulties. We're going to put Barry Bonds in the Hall of Fame, and we are going to put Roger Clemens in the Hall of Fame. I just think they're too good to be left out. That's really my biggest problem. Statistically, you could easily argue Bonds as the greatest, modern hitter of all time. You could also argue Roger Clemens the greatest pitcher of all time. And it's just, when you're that good and, when you're playing in a league that did not really enforce those rules against PEDs, even though they were there, they have some sympathy. I go Bonds Clemens, so I'm going for them. And then alongside Bonds and Clemens, I'm going to go with a player who has much less popular support, and that is going to be Sammy Sosa. And people are really interested in this pick. There's not a lot of popular support for Sammy Sosa, but here's why I go for him. The main piece of evidence that Sammy Sosa used steroids is a leaked voluntary test that the league conducted in 2002. It was supposed to be anonymous, and Sosa's name was leaked as having tested positive. And this is very important too, because this will be especially relevant to next year's ballot. That very same leaked test is also one that leaked the name of David Ortiz, and that's where the David Ortiz steroid allegations stem from. So in my opinion, based on that, if you're willing to vote for Ortiz, you should be willing to vote for Sosa. That's kind of where I'm at with it. I think, Sosa, does Sosa have a ton of WAR? No. He has 60 or something like that, or high 50s. But Sammy Sosa hit 600 home runs. Sammy Sosa hit 60 home runs in the season 4 times. So I just think, if you have a case that's that strong just on the traditional metrics, you would get in if you weren't a steroid user. So, Sosa, I got to put Sosa in because I think these allegations that have buried him are kind of bogus. We don't even know what substance they tested positive for. So I have a lot of sympathy for that. There's also with Sosa, there's the corked bat incident, which is when he was playing, he broke a bat in a game and it was revealed to be corked. And here's the thing, I don't care about that. I think there's a lot of people who, when confronted with the hypocrisy of voting for Ortiz but not voting for Sosa, they're gonna fall back on the corked bat thing. And I'm here to tell you, I don't think they actually care. I just think they need to find a way to justify, that inconsistency. So I'm gonna vote for Sosa. And I just want to be very clear. I'll also talk about players I didn't vote for, so that's important as well. My next vote is going to go to Curt Schilling. And do I feel good about it? No. I want to be very clear. I really don't agree with anything Curt Schilling says about political or social issues. However, I also don't believe in wielding the character clause in this way, because it seems to only be applied in a negative manner. This is a tool used to pass judgment on people and decide if they're virtuous enough. and I don't like it. There's plenty of scumbags already in the Hall. There's KKK members in the Hall. I would rather use the character clause as a means to boost virtuous people. In the past, this could have been Dale Murphy. In the future, this could be, Andrew McCutcheon or Curtis Granderson. If the character clause, means something, let's use it to build people up rather than tear them down. I'm sorry, if you're a member of any of the communities that Kurt Schilling has insulted, if you're an ethnic minority, if you're an immigrant, if you're a member of LGBTQ, I just really want to say I'm voting for Kurt Schilling, the baseball player, not Kurt Schilling, the person. And I understand it's hard to separate those two. I understand. And I hope we can still be friends. All right. Let's move on here to the more fun part of the ballot. Now that we've kind of made some check marks that we feel bad about. When I got in the ballot box for the election, I also voted for some people I felt bad about and felt really bad about. So, why not do it for the Hall of Fame ballot as well? Now let's move on to the sabermetric darlings, and I'm just going to go ahead and do it. Roland's in. Andrew Jones is in. Billy Wagner's in. Yeah, and I think I made myself pretty clear already why. Those are guys who I've pretty much been with since they got on the ballot. Another thing with Wagner, I'll point out, he had an excellent final year of his career. Like, if he really wanted to come back and rack up counting stats, he could have done that. He just simply chose not to. He simply chose to go out when he was excellent instead. Or did he get hurt? I can't remember. But either way, he went out on pretty high note. I don't want to get that wrong. All right, and then I'll go Todd Helton as well. I don't know if Todd Helton is a sabermetric darling. And I want to be clear here. Todd Helton is not Larry Walker. Larry Walker was better than Todd Helton. He stole bases. He won 7 Gold Gloves in right field. But I have become sympathetic, especially over the past few years, and especially, partially with the experience of dealing with Walker. I've become sympathetic to what's called the Coors hangover effect. And it means that Rockies hitters struggle more on the road because near sea level is actually like an uncomfortable environment for them. It's the same reason why, a pitcher who's not used to pitching in Coors, is often going to get lit up compared to like a Rockies pitcher. It's just it's an uncomfortable environment for them to be near sea level, and so they hit worse on the road when they're Rockies players than when they're not Rockies players, if that makes sense. What DJ LeMahieu has done with the Yankees since leaving Colorado has pretty much cemented my vote for Todd Helton, which is pretty funny because I think Coors puts players in like this double jeopardy. I think they're punished twice. The home stats have to be incredible because they're so scrutinized, the standard is so high, and yet people want to also look at their road stats as if that's an indication of their actual talent level, and quite frankly, that's not fair for them either. So I go Todd Helton here. I'm sympathetic to the Rockies, So 2 spots left, right? I voted for 8 players so far. Yes, I voted for 8 players so far. You can only vote for 10. And I'm going to use my last 2 spots for strategic voting. These are players that are going to be bordering around 5%, that I think the goal here is to just keep on the ballot. We want to keep these players on the ballot. Those players are going to be Bobby Abreu and Mark Burley. So that is going to complete my ballot. And look, I'm not jumping up and down and saying, hey, we got to put Bobby Abreu in the Hall of Fame. Hey, we got to put Mark Burley in the Hall of Fame. I'm simply trying to keep them around so we can have that discussion in the coming years because I think they've earned that much. They've earned, staying on the ballot. Just like Jones, just like Roland, just like Wagner will, just like Helton will, even if these guys don't make the Hall of Fame, they're going to be on the ballot for 10 years or the maximum stay. So those are players I voted for. I also want to talk about players I didn't vote for. And I think the biggest one's Manny Ramirez. So I voted Sosa, but not Ramirez. Is that hypocrisy? And I think that's a question we all have to ask ourselves. In terms of when I posted this ballot, in the Bobby Wallace video, that was basically the biggest thing that people pointed out to me. They said, how can you vote for Sosa and not Manny Ramirez? Is that hypocrisy? My answer is no, and here's why. Sosa's situation with the PEDs is sketchy. I think I already went over it. Leaked test, voluntary, don't even know what substance he tested for, different era of baseball. And then there's Ramirez, who's almost the opposite. Ramirez, he tested positive after all the steroid riffraff. He tested positive after the Mitchell report. He tested after all those dumb sluggers testified in front of Congress for some reason. It was a completely different era in regards to PED policy, and he did it twice. He served one steroid suspension. And I don't think it was actually technically a steroid suspension. It was like he was using the estrogen blockers or something like that. I don't know the technical term, but basically he tested positive for a substance which you would take alongside steroids, not the steroid itself. But yeah, he got that, and then at the end of his MLB career, he tested positive again, and that basically just led to his retirement from MLB. So you're talking about a player who, at a time when everyone knew it was bad, twice defied the PED policy. And I do think there's a distinction. I have much less sympathy for players like this. And look, am I going to vote for A-Rod? Because A-Rod's in that same pack with Ramirez as well. I think I probably will. And I think it's only because A-Rod is truly like inner circle statistically. And I can't imagine a Hall of Fame without Alex Rodriguez. He was that good. Will I vote for Robinson Cano? I don't think so. I think players who get caught for steroids in that post-Mitchell report, after all we had the fallout from the steroid era, if you get caught after that, I have much less sympathy for you than say, Bonds and Clemens, who really, they never failed a drug test for anything because they didn't care. The league didn't care. All right. So let's, but there is no doubt that Bonds and Clemens use PEDs. I want to be very clear on that. Vizquel left blank. A lot of sabermetrics types, they hate Vizquel. They think his WAR is not high enough. They know he's a bad hitter. I just see him as a very unique candidate. I think that's it. I think he played shortstop longer than anyone. I think that's really cool. He had 2,800 hits. I would consider voting for him in the future, but right now I think there's 10 to 12 better players, and that's why he gets left blank for now. There's higher priority players on the ballot. I think this is very important to keep in mind. There's going to be voters who don't vote for 10 players. In fact, a lot of them aren't going to vote for 10 players. So if you see a voter's ballot, and say, for example, they vote for 6 players, and one of them's Vizquel, don't think to yourself, gosh, this guy voted for Omar Vizquel, but he didn't vote for Scott Rowland. What's he thinking? It's like, dog, he could have voted for Scott Rowland if he wanted to as well. There's four more empty slots he could have used. So that guy, don't look at it that way. Don't be like, gosh, I can't believe this guy voted for Vizquel. He's an idiot. I think you should think to yourself, gosh, why didn't this guy vote for Scott Rowland? That's it. We don't have to go after Vizquel. Jeff Kent, kind of same thing, might vote for him later. I like the other guys more. I like the guys that I checked off more. Andy Pettit, Gary Sheffield. Where's Sheffield? Right there. Probably not getting a check mark for me due to the PED connections. Not really interested. Unlike Bonds and Clemens, I think the Hall can live without them. And even though I'd probably vote for both if they had squeaky clean records, the Hall can live without them. Sheffield, phenomenal hitter though. Terrible defender, phenomenal hitter. All right, so we're going to move on to some final thoughts here, and I want to show you all this website. This is the Hall of Fame tracker. You can see Ryan. Ryan, I believe you pronounce it Thibodeau. Runs the Hall of Fame tracker every year. It's a great resource if you're interested in this stuff. Basically, what happens is voters can release their ballots publicly, but they don't have to. But as far as ballots that are released, he tracks them here, and then you can, before the results are released in January, at least get some kind of idea where we're trending. I want to be very clear, like the voters that choose to make their ballots public, generally a little bit more progressive. So right here, we can see Barry Bonds. There's 52 public ballots. That's 14% of the total ballots that will be cast. Barry Bonds on those 52 ballots, 69.6%. And if I can just scroll over here to Clemens, it's probably going to be the same thing if I had to guess. Oh, gosh, wait, no. Clemens is there. Yeah, 69.6%. I would expect those numbers to come down. I think, the voters that are going to make their ballots public are probably going to be more sympathetic to Clemens and Bonds' case than those that choose to keep it private. So, and then, Omar Vizquel, kind of the opposite of this. He's at 44.6%, which is actually the same as Billy Wagner. I would expect Vizquel probably ends up higher than that, and I would expect probably Wagner ends up lower than that. The good thing with this is I think you can follow sort of the trend. If players are gaining ballots versus last year. So just some final thoughts to wrap things up. I'm not anticipating anyone getting in this year. If anyone gets in, it'll be Curt Schilling. But I think this is all just setting up for one of the most chaotic years in Hall of Fame voting history, which is going to be next year. That'll be when Bonds, Clemens, and Schilling are all on their final year on the ballot, and then Ortiz and A-Rod enter the picture at the same time as well. And these voters' heads, they're just going to spin. And it'll be a mess, but it'll probably also be fun. So I think for this year, instead of worrying about who gets in, look who gets big gains amongst the players who have plenty of years left, and players that are already anywhere between 20 and 50%. So these are going to be players like Andrew Jones. These are going to be players like Helton. These are going to be players like Rolen. These are going to be players like Billy Wagner. So I can come over here on Ryan Thibodeau's Hall of Fame tracker, which, by the way, the URL for this, bbhoftracker.com. You can also follow him on Twitter. You'll see plenty of links to that. If you come look at Billy Wagner, you can see that Billy Wagner, among returning voters from last year, he's already gained 8 votes. That's a pretty good gain. Scott Rowland has gained 9 votes. Andrew Jones has gained 6 votes. Todd Helton has gained 10 votes. If those guys keep getting gains, that's going to set them up for success in the future. So I think that's what we're really paying attention to. Those sort of mid-tier candidates, the ones that aren't Bonds, Clemens, Schilling, those are the ones that we're curious to see. Okay, are they going to get serious gains this year? Rolen, in particular, I think got pretty serious gains last year after he was looking kind of dead in the water there for a little bit. But now I think he's got a pretty decent chance. He's got, of course, 6 years left on the ballot, either way. So last thing I'm going to say, caring about the Hall of Fame is a character flaw of mine. It shouldn't matter as much as I feel like it does, but it does. It matters to me, and I'm stuck caring about this stupid thing, which is really just a plaque in the most boring room of an otherwise terrific museum. So yeah, thank you so much for watching me. I will show you all my ballot one last time. This is Foolish Baseball, signing off.